How often do you find yourself solving the same problem for your team over and over again? Feeling like you're constantly putting out fires that your team ought to be able to handle. In fact, feeling like you're doing the job or jobs one level below you, so you can't do the job you need to do as a leader of your team or a leader of the company. What I find is there's a skill that many leaders lack that can take us to a whole new level in making sure our people could solve their own problems and making sure that we could focus on what we need to do from a vision, from a strategy, from an accountability, from a culture standpoint. And we're not constantly doing the job one level down. And the skill I find most leaders really need to improve is coaching instead of managing. So I want to share with you on this episode 5 ways to coach your team instead of managing them. And let me talk about the difference first, or at least my definition of the difference. For me, managing is focus on delegating tasks, measuring outputs, right? And I'm not saying you don't need to do that. You absolutely do need to delegate. You absolutely do need to measure outcomes and hold people accountable. But coaching is different than that. Not instead of, but in addition to. Coaching is more about guiding and asking questions and empowering others to take ownership. Coaching, the way my coach taught me, is coaching is about helping people surface the right action for them. And by the way, the right action for them might be very different than the right action for you. We all have different styles. We have different personal values. We have different goals in mind. So the right action for you in a certain situation and the right action for someone else, for someone on your team, may be different. So let me give you some reasons why I see leaders default to managing as opposed to coaching. And one is leaders very often feel like they need to be the smartest person in the room. They need to have all the answers. And it does take time and maturity to understand that, man, you're much better off if other people around you have those answers. So there's, so one trap is feeling like you need all the answers. The second trap is people think coaching is too slow. What you'll find out as we go through this episode is I believe coaching is much more about asking questions. Well, managing or directing is about telling people what to do. It's a whole lot faster for me to just tell you what to do than it is to ask you a bunch of questions that guide you to figuring out what the right answer is for you. And it is slower. But as I think you'll see, it's only slower initially. It's only slower when you think about it in the short term. But in the long term, if you're allowing your team to work more independently, it's going to save you a bunch of time and a bunch of frustration. And you'll be able to go away for 3 weeks on vacation and your team will keep moving without you. So the first common trap is feeling like you've got to be the smartest person in the room. You need all the answers. The second is feeling like coaching is too slow, so people default to managing. And the third is believing your way is the only way. And again, the right action for you may be different than the right action for someone else. And by the way, what you believe is the right way may not be the right way, and it may be that coaching brings out a better way. So let's talk about 5 ways to get you out of this problem of teams becoming dependent on you, failing to develop, and waiting for you to solve the problem. So 5 strategies. First one, I'll call ask, don't tell. And the idea of this strategy is to transition from giving direction, giving advice, telling people what to do, to coaching by asking open, strategic questions. Questions like, what options have you considered so far? Someone comes to you with a problem. We can give them advice right away. And by the way, if we give them advice right away, we may actually be solving the wrong problem. But what options have you considered? What do you recommend we do? Or I love this question, and I'm stealing this from Michael Bungay Stanier. And if you want to get better at asking great coaching questions, read The Coaching Habit by Michael Bungay Stanier. And my favorite question that he asks is, what's the real challenge here for you? Now, let me give you an example of how powerful a question that is. If someone comes to you and says, hey, I really need some help. I'm having so much trouble managing this project. Automatically, we want to give advice. So we might give people a whole lecture on project management, on gaining buy-in, on using project management tools and understanding, predecessors and dependencies and you name it. But when we ask a question like, what's the real challenge here for you? And we dig deep, and Michael Bungay Stanier likes to ask that question, get the first answer and say, and what else? And what else? But if you ask the question, what's the real challenge here for you? Before giving advice, you may find out the real challenge is this person doesn't believe there's going to be value in the end result of the project. You may find out this person is having a difficult time in their relationship with their co-lead on the project. So by asking that question, you get to the heart of the problem versus potentially solving the wrong problem. So we want to ask, don't tell. That's strategy number 1. Strategy number 2 is let them own the solution. Instead of directing team members to implement your ideas, help guide them to implement their ideas. And here's an example of that. So let's imagine one of your team members comes to you and says, I'm trying to recruit for this new position on my team and I'm having all sorts of trouble, can't find the right people. I don't know what to do. If you give them advice and give them the answer, so you tell them, okay, what I want you to do is, post a job on LinkedIn, call this recruiter, talk to people on your team and, find out who they know. If that person does those things and hits a brick wall, what are they going to do? They're going to look at you and say, okay, genius, what's next? If you follow the first strategy and ask questions and then guide them to implement their ideas, what happens when they own that idea and they hit a brick wall? Instead of looking back at you, they've got ownership. They're going to climb over it, go around it, go underneath, break the brick wall down. So stop trying to own everything and be the smartest person in the room. Let them own the solution. Another great book for asking questions, it's Coaching Habit by Michael Bungay Stanier, for allowing a team member to take more ownership of a solution. Read Multipliers by Liz Wiseman. That's one of the best books I've ever read on leading and coaching and guiding other people. So number 2 is let them own the solution. Number 3 is spot and nurture strengths of your people. The more you can amplify your people's strengths rather than focusing on their weaknesses, the more you can amplify your team's strengths. the more you're going to have to dive in and do things for them, solve every problem, jump in and put out every fire. Figure out when you look at your team, understand, identify the strengths of each member of your team. And you're probably going to find each member of your team has some very different strengths and maybe some very different weaknesses. But if you look at those together, you're going to find that there are people on your team that are really strong in areas where other people on the team are pretty weak, and vice versa. So by amplifying strengths together, you can actually make weaknesses unimportant by individual, because in total for the team, you're shifting roles and responsibilities to better amplify people's strengths. I have a whole episode on that pretty recently called Turn Your Strengths into a Superpower. So check out that episode. But a great book to read on spotting and nurturing strengths is Strengths Finder 2.0. So read that book. Spot and Nurture Strengths is a great way to start doing more coaching than managing. Next, the fourth of 5 is focus on growth, not perfection. Encourage your team at times to take calculated risks, as long as you and they are learning from those mistakes. Build a process and a culture of feedback that emphasizes kind of iterating through a plan versus just beating people up and having them shift that plan. A great example from a book called Measure What Matters, talking about Google's OKR structure, objectives and key results. And when Google creates an OKR, which is another word for a priority or a goal, they don't want leaders to achieve 100% of their goals, as weird as that sounds. That's not their target. Their target is 70%. Now, why would they target anything less than 100%? Well, they feel if people are achieving 100% of their goals, they're probably sandbagging at some level, or they're not doing things that are a little scary. They're only tackling things they know they can complete. Well, to focus on growth and not perfection for an individual, for your team, and for the company, you want to encourage people to try things they've never done before. Take a shot at something they don't even know is possible. Now, without a culture of feedback, we don't learn from those things. Without the right planning and communication rhythm of annual planning and quarterly planning and education and monthly check-in and weekly accountability and one-on-one meetings with your direct reports, if you don't have that in place, you're not going to learn from those mistakes. So we need a planning and communication rhythm to really help us accomplish this fourth strategy of focus on growth and not perfection. Let's go to the fifth strategy. And it's setting aside the time to have real coaching conversations. Now, I recommend, and I have a previous podcast episode, and I'm forgetting what it's called, but it's about a one-on-one meeting framework that I recommend for all of my leaders. And without taking you through all of the details, the idea of the one-on-one, a specific framework for the one-on-one, and doing that, I believe it should be weekly, at worst bi-weekly, is you have two different types of one-on-one meetings. One-on-one, and this is the typical one-on-one, I call the feedback and accountability meeting. That's where you're doing exactly what it says. You're giving people feedback on how they're doing, behaviors, productivity, and you're holding them accountable to those things they said they were going to do. And that kind of sounds like the typical one-on-one meeting. But then every other meeting is the coaching meeting. And the idea of the coaching meeting is, as the leader, that's not your agenda. That's your team member's agenda. They're coming to you with a problem, a challenge, an opportunity, a question they have. And your job is not to give them advice. Your job is to ask questions. As we've said, ask questions and coach them through. And by the way, not only is that good for them, but it's great practice for you to become a better coach. So let me wrap up and talk about some takeaways and summarize the 5 strategies we've talked about. But really, what we're talking about is shifting from managing to coaching by asking better questions, inviting ownership, spotting and leveraging strengths, fostering growth, not perfection, and building coaching into your rhythm, into your weekly rhythms, and even into your daily rhythms. When someone knocks on your door and says, I've got a problem, coach them. Don't give them advice. So here's my challenge for you. In your next one-on-one meeting, or even in your next team meeting, try coaching your team or an individual through a challenge rather than telling them what to do. And see what changes, not just what changes in that moment, but afterward. It may take some time. What changes? Is the team member building new habits where they're using your questions as a model to think through challenges, issues, problems themselves? And remember, the best leaders are not the ones with the most answers. The best leaders are the ones who multiply the brain power, the talents, the capabilities of their team. And always remember, if you want a great company, you need a great leadership team. I hope the idea of doing more coaching and maybe a little less managing will help you get there. Talk to you soon.